All right, in this section of the lecture, we're going to look at the challenges a new state must face. If we have a state that has arguably met its four elements, there are responsibilities that go along with that new status of statehood. Now, before we go into those responsibilities, we should talk at first about this idea of self-determination. Now, self-determination generally refers to the inhabitants' right to choose how they will organize and be governed. And essentially what this means is that the people of an area should have the ultimate authority in saying who is going to govern them, who is going to govern that area. Self-determination was a concept that we saw a lot in the post-colonial era, the decolonization era, when European countries gave up their colonies and allowed the inhabitants of those colonies to organize, to determine for themselves what sort of government they are going to have. So self-determination is the right to choose how they will organize and be governed. Self-determination was reflected again in the time period after World War I, as we saw numerous pre-war empires break up. And again, the question of who is going to take over these new areas, many thought that that answer should come from the people themselves, self-determination of the inhabitants. In fact, Article 73 of the United Nations Charter says that the most important factor in deciding statehood status should be self-determination, the modern law of self-determination. Now, the problem with self-determination is that there is a conflict, because there is also an international doctrine that says that we should respect the territorial integrity of a country, that the other countries should respect the borders that exist within that country and should not interfere with the internal affairs of that country. That's the key idea of sovereignty. So once again, turning to the Crimean Peninsula situation, I think most people would argue that the people of Crimea want to be Russian. The majority of people want to belong to Russia. They are culturally Russian. They are linguistically Russian. They are historically Russian. The people of Crimea took a vote before seceding from Ukraine, and that vote should give some authority, the idea of they are self-determining. They have determined that they do not want to be part of Ukraine, that they would rather be a part of Russia. But of course there's this conflict with the idea that other countries should not interfere with the territorial integrity of a country, and therefore Russia's decision to annex Crimea was a violation of territorial integrity. Now this conflict, we see it played out in other ways too. And again, I'll refer you to the presentation on Kosovo, because Kosovo was the opposite, in which the people of Kosovo, the people of the province of Kosovo, a province of Serbia, believed that they wanted to be an independent country, whereas Serbia was controlling Kosovo. And so in this case, the Western powers decided that self-determination was more important than territorial integrity, and therefore, in that case, in the case of Kosovo, self-determination is the most important thing. So it's a tough situation, and oftentimes we see that the law of self-determination and the law regarding respect of territorial integrity can actually be shaped by political affairs. Now, a state does have responsibilities. What responsibilities does a state have? Well, first of all, a state may have liability for its actions. So after statehood, the first responsibility of a state should be to make reparations for any international wrongdoing. Anything that they've done wrong, they owe reparations for those wrongs. They are obligated to pay the people harmed. Now, the conduct of a person or group of persons is considered an act of state if the person or group of persons is under the direction of that state in carrying out the conduct. So deciding whether the state has liability, you look to see what are the people that were acting, the groups that were acting, were they acting in their capacity as state actors? There's another doctrine you probably heard of, the doctrine of sovereign immunity, says that sometimes states are shielded from liability. Because we have a belief that sovereign entities should be respected, that the status as a sovereign entity may shield a state from having to respond to lawsuits in the courts of another country. Now we do this, we apply this doctrine of sovereign immunity, meaning we don't interfere with the acts of a state. We don't sue them in our courts because we don't want to be sued in the courts of another state. So this idea of sovereign immunity is generally respected because countries don't want to be dragged into lawsuits around the world. And so simply having the status of a sovereign can shield the state from liability. Now, the scope of sovereign immunity, how far does it extend? Does it extend to a foreign ambassador who gets a parking ticket? Probably so. A speeding ticket? Probably so. If that foreign ambassador kills someone in the United States, sovereign immunity is probably not going to reach that. So oftentimes we have to decide how far does sovereign immunity reach. We know that it will shield the state from some liability, but just how far is not always clear. In general, the representatives of a foreign state have what's called a privilege, and it's a matter of international law that courts will not entertain an action against those people or institutions who have that privilege unless that institution waives the privilege and agrees to be sued. If it works the same way domestically. If, for instance, you decide to sue the state of Oklahoma for maybe you tripped and hurt yourself at the football game in the stadium that is owned by the state of Oklahoma, well, can you sue the state of Oklahoma or not? The doctrine of sovereign immunity says no, because it's a state. However, every state has an act in which the state can agree to be sued by plaintiffs. And that those acts are doing, those laws are doing, is they are waiving the privilege of sovereign immunity. When a country's not acting as a sovereign, then it would be difficult to claim immunity. And going back to our previous example, the foreign ambassador who parks in an illegal zone while attending the United Nations, well, then they are acting on state business. The foreign ambassador who kills an individual would not be acting as a representative of the state. When two states agree to establish diplomatic relations, what they do is they will first exchange representatives who will usually work in the respective capitals of each state. These are the embassy employees, the consular employees. And in fact, when states break off relations, generally what happens is the host state will declare the sending state's diplomat to be a persona non grata, which means unwelcome in the country. Now, what do ambassadors do? Well, their core function is to protect the interest of the state from the host state. And not just to protect the interest, but to promote the interest of the state from within the host state. So when you go to work for the State Department, for instance, you are there in the foreign country representing the interests of the United States and the interests of the citizens of the United States. Diplomats, as I said, may be protected from host state authorities and private citizens in civil and even criminal matters.